Hello everyone, welcome to Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. Aggressive remarks and continuing provocations. Tensions on the peninsula are escalating more than ever before. Kim Jongun has urged the regime to revise its constitution to define South Korea as an invariable and a hostile enemy, and as if to show its determination, decided to abolish agencies that promote inter-Korean dialogue. This comes after North Korea fired a solid-fuel IRBM carrying a hypersonic warhead. Meanwhile, the regime's foreign minister visited Russia, having a rare meeting with President Vladimir Putin. Why is the regime beefing up the hostile rhetoric, and what could have been discussed during the foreign minister's Moscow visit? For more on the reclusive regime, we welcome Doctor Go Myong-hyun, Senior Fellow at Asan Institute for Policy Studies. Dr. Go, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
And we also have Professor Ramon Pacheco-Pardo from King's College London. Good to see you, Professor.
Thanks for having me, too.
All right, first question to our Dr. Go. During the Supreme People's Assembly, North Korean leader Kim Jongun urged constitutional change to define South Korea as the #1 hostile country and unchanging principal enemy. How did you see such remarks?
Well, I think it's a poor posturing by the North Koreans. Again, we have seen this train going by before. What I remember is 2013. Back then, Kim Jong-un, who recently became the leader of North Korea, unilaterally shut down the Kaesong industrial complex and asked the foreign diplomats posted to Pyongyang to leave the country because a war was imminent. And also he conducted major civil defense exercises for the North Korean population and telling them that the war was about to break out. We know that the war didn't break out back then. It was more of a posturing on the part of North Korea to start a provocation cycle to pressure the South Koreans to make concessions. So we are seeing, I think, a similar action going on. And the reason why the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un made mentions of the constitutional change as if it is an irreversible step by the North Koreans to cut off the inter-Korean relations for good and forever, it's because it imbues more credibility to their actions. But then we have to understand the constitution in North Korea doesn't mean the same thing as in here or elsewhere. It's totally reversible. It's totally variable. North Koreans can easily take this step back and then recommence inter-Korean relations if they wanted to. But then, because they want to carry their word, they want to put some weight to their words, they are insinuating that this is an irreversible step, therefore the only confrontation is going to take place in the near future. So it's more about threatening South Korea rather than, making preparation to start a war, for instance.
All right, I see. Well, as our Dr. Go already mentioned, efforts to, add more credibility on its words, Professor Pacheco-Pardo, Kim also ordered the abolishment of agencies that are in charge of inter-Korean dialogue and cooperation. But before we talk about this more, could you give us some details of what these agencies were responsible for?
Well, we have the Committee for Peaceful Unification, which handles inter-Korean diplomatic relations when there is a dialogue between both or diplomatic exchanges between both. We have the National Economic Cooperation Bureau, which is in charge of inter-Korean economic cooperation in a broad sense, not a specific projects, but broad economic cooperation between the two of them when there is or when there was trade between both of them, investment from the south into the north, discussing issues such as infrastructure development, for example. And then Kungan-san, which is the tourism project in Mount Kungan, in the mountain of Kungan in North Korea, that South Koreans in the past could travel to. So in a sense, they handle both diplomatic and economic relations, even though I would agree with what Dr. Ko said. This can be reversed at any point in time. Obviously, talking about abolishing the institutions and actually abolishing them gives more credibility to the threat coming from North Korea. But at any point, Kim Jong-un could decide that he wants to go back on these decisions.
All right, I see your point. Now, Dr. Go, already you mentioned how all of these actions could be reversed, but still many say this move would signal the end of 70 years of inter-Korean relations since the Armistice Agreement in 1953. Do you partly agree?
Well, it doesn't really mean the end of the inter-Korean relations for good. North Koreans who like South Korea think in that way because they know that the South Koreans, many South Koreans still cling on to the idea of unification with North Korea one day, and therefore they want to add gravity to these threats. But in that sense, though, I mean, I mentioned already this is a posturing. Professor Pacheco Pardo also mentioned that this is again likely a posturing on the part of North Korea. So in that sense, it's not a credible threat. But on the other hand, I think this is a very characteristic of Kim Jong-un himself in many ways. Kim Jong-un is he's not young, but then he represents a new generation of North Korean leadership. He's going to be 40 this year. He was born at the end of, 40 years ago in 1983. 84 because he turned 40 this year. But then you have to understand that this makes him a millennial in North Korea, and in that sense, it represents a break from the past. Unlike his father or grandfather, who consecrated the idea of unification as the most important mission that the North Korean as a country had, Kim Jong-un, I think, disagrees with that idea. And then, in fact, I think he rejects the idea of a confederation with South Korea or unification with the South. He wants North Korea a standalone, viable entity that can survive on its own, and even make North Korea great again. So in that sense, I think he represents a different type of leadership that we have seen before. So in that sense, what he's saying, even though it's not threatening as they seem to be on the surface, I think finally Kim Jong-un is making it very clear that the unification is not this regime's topmost goal.
All right, I see. Now, staying on Kim's words, Professor Pacheco Pardo, Kim also noted that Pyongyang would not recognize the northern limit line, the de facto interKorean maritime border. What does this mean?
Well, from a North Korean perspective, this was an imposition, first by the United Nations, the United Nations Command, but also by South Korea more recently, because South Korea also recognizes the line de facto. This was an imposition which meant that there are waters in the West Sea that North Korean ships, fishing ships, for example, but also the military should be able to navigate in, that they're not allowed to because of this artificial imposition of a maritime border by the UNC and by South Korea. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see the North Korean military testing a South Korean response to North Korean incursions south of this NLL. But it also has to be said that obviously this has been contested for many decades. So I don't think this is a fundamental shift in the position for North Korea. Kim Jong-un is reiterating that from his perspective and from a North Korean perspective, this is something that North Korea never agreed to, and therefore North Korea is under no obligation to respect this maritime border separating the two Koreas.
All right, not a fundamental shift. All right, Professor Pacheco Pardo. Now, Dr. Go, let's move on to North Korea's latest provocations. Earlier this week, North Korea successfully tested a solid fuel IRBM bearing this hypersonic warhead. But what is so special about this?
Well, North Korea has already tested this kind of weapon, the hypersonic ballistic missile, twice already. This is the third time. What makes a difference compared to the previous instances of testing such a weapon is the fact that the range has grown larger. It's a longer range, and it flew like 1,000 kilometers. But then, technically speaking, at least according to the North Koreans' claims, they have replaced the previous liquid fuel rocket engine with a solid fuel one. This is part of the pattern of North Korea's missile development. North Koreans have achieved ICBM technology and ballistic missile technology using the liquid fuel rocket engines, but now they're in the process of replacing them with solid fuel engines. And there's a tactical advantage there because they shorten the time for the launch preparations, and that minimizes the window detection by South Korea and the United States. So it confers a tactical advantage, and they have essentially applied the technology to their hypersonic weapon system. But again, let me reiterate that this is not really a groundbreaking weapons technology. North Korea already had this technology with the liquid fuel rocket engines before, but then again, this is not groundbreaking. So I think there's too much noise about it, that this is like some sort of threatening weapon that South Korea and the United States cannot defend against. But that's not quite true.
All right, I see. Professor Patrick, one thing for sure is that the regime is diversifying weapons with multi-stage high-threat solid fuel engines. To what level have they completed the development, and how concerning is this in your opinion?
Well, it is concerning in the sense that a few countries have been able to master this technology. We have the US, Russia, China, France, South Korea is also developing this type of technology quite successfully, in my view. But it is very few countries across the world. It is concerning in the sense that this type of solid fuel missiles actually are easier to operate. They don't need to be refueled right before the launch, so actually they can be launched more quickly. They tend to be more difficult to stop once they are on Earth because of these characteristics. So I do think that it is concerning. Having said that, the threat that South Korea has been under for many years and for decades really, I don't think it significantly goes up because North Korea has developed this technology. Same for the US or Japan, other countries obviously that feel threatened by North Korea. In terms of the stage of development, the honest answer is we are not entirely sure. As always with North Korea, has been very good at developing its weapon systems in a way that has been difficult to detect the progress they have made until a test actually takes place. But clearly this is a priority for North Korea, and I would assume that over the next few months and over the next few years, we will see more tests because North Korea will try to see to what extent it is able to develop this technology successfully, especially now that we see increasing cooperation with Russia, has mastered this technology. So Russia could provide support for North Korea in the development of this technology. And I wouldn't be surprised if at some point in time, cooperation between China and North Korea also resumes to an extent that has not been possible was not possible during the COVID-19 pandemic. And this may also help North Korea in the development of this technology.
All right, more tests expected to come. Now, Dr. Go, I'd like to now ask about the intention behind such, aggressive remarks and also ongoing provocations. Could we say this is just part of efforts to boost its leverage against both U.S. and South Korea before the U.S. presidential election?
So I think it's exactly what's going on. I think North Koreans have changed their tactic a little bit compared to a couple of years ago. So given the indifference towards dialogue that the Biden administration has showed, dialogue with North Korea here, in this case, North Korea, I think, essentially gave up in starting engaging the United States in dialogue, at least for the duration of the Biden administration. So what they have done instead is to create this alignment with China and Russia. And because China and Russia are nuclear powers and they are major powers, at least China in this case, North Korea wanted to showcase their nuclear capability, and by standing shoulder to shoulder to these two countries, I think they wanted to create the perception that North Korea was a significant power to be contended with. And then this is a message that they wanted to have towards the Biden administration. But then, so this is the idea of a new Cold War, that the blockification of the globe and then the regional order that the North Koreans are pushing very hard. But I think this bloc has shown cracks in the recent days, especially because China doesn't seem to be too keen on this idea. Right. We know that the United States and China have tried to stabilize the relationship. Most recently in November in San Francisco's APEC meeting, President Xi Jinping of China and then President Joe Biden have agreed to reopen the military communication channels over Taiwan. So I think these efforts by China and the United States to stabilize the relationship, I think really contradicted the North Korea's idea that there's a new Cold War emerging in the region. So I think North Korea have essentially, I think they're trying to engage the United States again in dialogue eventually. But then the United States clearly is not going to listen to North Korea in this way. They want pressure, they need pressure. And then North Korea will do that by using the provocations and of ever increasing scale throughout this year. And the reason why they want to do this year is because, obviously, as you mentioned, there's a U.S. presidential election coming up. And then what North Korea expects to do is to engage the new administration, whether that's the continuation of the Biden administration or maybe Donald Trump, the North Korea wants to start a dialogue with the United States with a clean slate. So that means they need to complete the development of strategic weapons before next year, 2025. So they're essentially front-loading their provocation for this year. So that's why we expect North Korea to intensify the pace of provocation, both in terms of frequency, but also the scale. Because one of the major provocations that we expect North Korea to carry out finally is the much anticipated the seventh nuclear test. So I think that's in the offing, and I think we'll see more ICBM tests. And what North Korea will try to do is to somehow overlap the capability with the message that North Korea is always ready to start a war. So I think we'll see a lot of this and hear a lot of noise coming from North Korea in this sense. But we have to understand that this is not about preparing for war. It's more about the typical political offensive that North Korea engages in times like this, when there's an important election taking place, and there's a possibility, paradoxically, of engaging the United States.
All right, I see. Thank you, Dr. Go. Professor Piscicapardo, we are going to talk about Russia and North Korea ties, but before that, I'd like to ask you this question. According to some experts, the situation on the Korean Peninsula is more dangerous than it has been at any time since early June 1950, and Kim Jong-un has made a strategic decision to go to war. What's your view on this?
I don't necessarily agree. I don't think that a strategic decision to go to war has been made by any stretch of the imagination. And I do think that we have seen tensions go up and down in the Korean Peninsula. Remember 2017, but also, of course, 2010, we had clashes between the two Koreas. 2002 and late 1990s, we had naval clashes as well. Even in the 1960s, 1980s, assassination attempts by North Korea on South Korean leaders. So I do think that there have been moments in time in which tensions in the Korean Peninsula have been, frankly, much higher than they are today. Yes, there is growing rhetorical threats coming from North Korea, as we have discussed. North Korea is improving its military capabilities, as South Korea is. But I don't think this means that tensions are reaching a boiling point like we saw in 1950. And I don't think that Kim Jong-un has decided he's going to go to war. We should remember that if North Korea decides to launch a strike on South Korea, most modeling indicates that would be the end of the North Korean regime because of the retaliation that would come from the South, that would come from the US. So in a sense, this would mean Kim Jong-un seeking a suicidal mission, essentially, going to war that he knows is very likely to end with himself and his family dead, if not dead in prison, right? So I don't think he has taken this decision. What I do think, though, is that tensions will continue, as Dr. Go has mentioned, throughout this year. And I do think that tensions can probably go up, or will probably go up before the upcoming U.S. election, and depending on the result of the election, perhaps also in the months after.
All right, so tensions will go up, but Kim Jong-un does not have any intention to go war. I see. Now, Dr. Go, let's move on to Russia-North Korea ties. North Korean Foreign Minister Choi Sun-hee went to Russia at the invitation of her Russian counterpart. And the Kremlin said that it intends to develop its partnership with North Korea in all areas. That being said, could we expect more arms deals between the two rogue states?
Well, no, the more arms deals is given. But I think the reason why Choi Sun-hee went there wasn't at the behest of the Russian MOFA's invitation. It's likely the North Korea demanded the Russian government to have a meeting between Choi Sun-hee and then Russian President Vladimir Putin. And I think the reason why North Korean foreign minister went to Moscow is because the regime in North Korea wants Putin to pay a reciprocal visit to North Korea, as he had promised back in October last year. And the reason why North Korea needs it right now is because it really gives credibility to the idea that North Korean provocation is just a part of North Korea trying to engage the United States, even though that's exactly the goal, is to somehow portray their actions in the framework of this new Cold War, as I described before. So it really aggrandizes North Korea's provocations. It makes North Korea part of a much bigger story, which is a global confrontation between, the authoritarian bloc and the United States on the other hand. So, but for that storyline to be credible and therefore pressure the United States in this direction, it's very essential for Vladimir Putin to come to North Korea because there are a lot of speculation about the nature of the rapprochement between Moscow and Pyongyang. Some people claim that this is the beginning of a new partnership, which is exactly the perception that Russians and North Koreans are trying to give. But there are many skeptical voices about this, thinking that Russians probably engage in North Koreans as a transactional way, on a transactional kind of relationship in which North Korea provides military assistance to the Russians in exchange for something concrete, maybe transfer of weapons technology. But then that's a one-time deal for the duration of the Ukraine war. So because North Korea is a very toxic entity, and there's not much for Russia to gain in the long run by engaging North Korea and getting close to the North Koreans. So, but then this is a perception that the Russians also want to dispel, regardless of the nature of the true nature of the relationship that they aspire to have with North Korea, because it acts as a leverage, especially vis-a-vis South Korea. I think Russians are very concerned that the South Koreans might provide lethal, direct military assistance to Ukrainians, because that could change the direction of the war in Ukraine. That's how precarious the Russian position is right now in Ukraine. So so they want to emphasize to Seoul that in fact, Russia holds all the cards when it comes to North Korea. That if South Korea wants Russia not to provide military technology such as missile technology or surveillance satellite technology, then South Korea should stay out of the Ukraine war. So, and then that best leverage to do so is by giving the perception that the Putin wants to make North Korea a partner. But then again, I don't think Russians can deal with the long-term consequences of such partnership in North Korea. So this is a very multidimensional game that Russians are playing against the South and the United States by large. So in that sense, I think what is going on is that North Koreans are pressuring the Russians, but then Russians are still quite ambiguous about it.
All right, very interesting, Dr. Go. Now, Professor Patrick Pardo, that being said, the Kremlin spokesperson said a visit by Putin to North Korea could take place in the foreseeable future. But based on what our Dr. Go said, when do you expect this to really happen? And if it does, what agenda items might be addressed?
Well, I think Dr. Go has explained very well that, in my view, I agree with him, Russia is taking an instrumental approach to relations with North Korea. This is made by Russia now because of the transfer of missiles, artillery shells from North Korea to Russia that helps Putin to continue his war in Ukraine. But I don't think that Russia wants to be seen as too close to North Korea, especially because at some point the war will finish. And at that point in time, Russia will want to have a different sort of relationship with South Korea, certainly, but also with the US, with Japan, with other countries in the region as well. So I don't think that Russia has taken the decision yet on Putin visiting North Korea. It is a possibility, certainly. Regardless of whether that visit takes place or not, I think that any interaction that we see now between North Korea and Russia is going to focus on 3 points. First of all, North Korea continuing to provide weapons to Russia as it continues its invasion of Ukraine. Secondly, what is Russia going to give North Korea in return? Technology, expertise. I think this is going to continue. But thirdly, I think there's also the global dimension. Kim Jongun clearly wants to be seen as a leader that has important links with other countries. And right now, Russia and Putin is the leader that is giving him this position on the global stage, because we have seen that, for example, not even Xi Jinping has been willing to meet with Kim Jong-un after the COVID-19 pandemic. So I do think that North Korea will continue to insist on these diplomatic links with Russia and creating a more meaningful relationship between the two countries. But at this point in time, as I said, I don't think Russia has taken the decision to go down this route.
All right. Thank you for your point of view, Professor. Now, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition. Thank you, Dr. Go and Professor Patrick Pardo, for your time and insights. We really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.